Today on the podcast, we have Richard Burnett, a teacher and co-founder of the .B and the Mindfulness in Schools project. Richard recently spoke at an Action for Happiness event, and you can check this out along with our other cool videos by going to YouTube and typing in Action for Happiness in the search bar. This will bring you to our page. Furthermore, if you're looking for something cool to do in 2017 or looking for a new resolution, why don't you check out our Exploring What Matters course. It's an 8-week course intended to explore what matters for a happy and meaningful life. It's a course based on the latest scientific evidence and is really intended for people of all backgrounds, particularly those who would like to see a more positive and caring society. So again, find all that at actionforhappiness.org, which will link you to groups and events. You can check out who the next speaker is going to be and when. Co-hosting the podcast today are Anne and Fran, two very good friends of mine who ran the 8-week course alongside me, and two friends that love to practice mindfulness and had many questions for Richard. So without further ado, enjoy the podcast. So Richard, firstly, thank you very much again for doing this. And you are a teacher at Tonbridge School, and this is one of the first schools in the UK that actually implemented mindfulness on the curriculum. So we could perhaps touch upon that a bit later on. Mm-hmm. You are the co-founder and director of the Mindfulness in Schools project. Mm-hmm. So, not only putting the content together that's being rolled out in schools, but also the training of students and the teachers and the complete package. So this year there have been many stories about schools, not only in the UK but across the globe, that are successfully implementing mindfulness. And I just wanted to ask, how is this growth in implementation around the world, how has that, I guess, had an effect on your role and also the role of the Mindfulness in Schools project, especially over the past couple of years?
We don't really know yet whether it is being successfully implemented. We know that mindfulness is being implemented, but it's being implemented in very different ways by very different people. And I suppose I would say, and what I don't clearly, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and I wouldn't be as involved in this field and as passionate about this field, if I didn't strongly believe in it. But I also have a very, I would strike and probably will strike a note of caution throughout this discussion, and I don't want that to appear as sort of, skeptical or cynical in any way at all. On the contrary, I do want it to appear as sort of, reasonable and balanced, because we actually know very little about what's happening in mindfulness in schools. We know that lots of people are doing it. We know that we know how many teachers we've trained. We know what kind of schools roughly it's being taught in. But how successful it is, we don't really yet know that. There is a big project underway at the moment, which is being led by Oxford University. It's the Myriad project, and that is going to tell us a few things. But even that is not going to, definitively prove, for many complex reasons, whether mindfulness works in schools or not. Because I suppose if we've learned one thing in the last few years, it is that it is phenomenally complex and very challenging to embed mindfulness in schools, because of the cultures, because of the people, because of the pressure on time, because of the pressure on curriculum, because of the pressure on achievement and grades, because of the lack of funding, the lack of money. This is going to be a long, I think the word journey is overused. I'm not a huge fan of the word, but it is going to be a long journey. We're talking 10, 20 years here. And I'm excited because the journey has begun and there are many people involved and the early signs are very positive.
Yes.
But it's going to take time, and I don't want to get too carried away with suggesting that it is, a panacea, a cure for all, the answer to education's difficulties.
Okay, but so what are some of the signs that this is headed in the right direction? I know so a lot of it may be anecdotal, and from what you see quite regularly, maybe it is a misrepresentation of what you see online. As far as schools, applying mindfulness, and then a journalist comes along and writes a piece about how great it is, etc. But there is a lot of that going on, right?
Yes, and the signs are very positive. I mean, as I say, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't believe in it and believe that it worked. The anecdotal evidence is extremely strong.
Yes.
In that I get that every day. You just have to speak to somebody who you're teaching at a school who's just come out of an exam, or who's just come out of a music performance, or who's just come, off a football pitch, or has just come back from, being pulled away from, fighting their little brother or big sister. You get anecdotes all the time. You also have a huge amount of evidence from the adult mindfulness world. And there is just, by extension, if it is being proven to work in the adult world, I think one can extend that a little bit to young people. Young people we are all human beings, and some of the benefits that you're seeing in the adult world transfer quite naturally to the student world, to the pupil world. Even in the adult world, we have to be cautious. There are relatively few very large-scale randomized controlled trials which really definitively conclude one way or the other. But there is sufficient evidence for it to have been put on recommended by the National Institute of Clinical Excellence as a treatment for depression. You can go to your GP now, and if he or she diagnoses you as suffering from depression, they might prescribe you an 8-week mindfulness-based cognitive therapy course. Now, similarly, in a school's context, we see that it is helping young people with anxiety and stress. Even there, we have to be a little bit cautious, because in schools, we're not really using it in the same way. We're not using it as a therapeutic intervention. We're using it as a life skill. And I think this is one of the most interesting differences between schools and the adult mindfulness world. In schools, you will have 30 kids in front of you in the classroom. There will be some of them who want to use it for coping with their anxiety, but there will be others who aren't experiencing anxiety. There'll be those who want to use it to help them concentrate in the exams. There'll be others who want to use it just to notice, that what's going on every day, to taste their food, to drink their tea, to feel the wind in their hair, just normal everyday enjoying being alive. You will have people who want to use it in music performance, people who want to use it to help them when they're taking a penalty in the football match against, their rival school. So you've got tons of different ways of using it. But that, for me, is why mindfulness, certainly in a school's context, but perhaps more widely, has to be seen as a life skill. I would compare it to reading and writing. We will teach you how to practice mindfulness in the same way we will teach you how to read and how to write. What you read and what you write is your decision. Yeah. But the skill is, in my view, common sense. Very practical common sense. But because it seems to be from slightly left field for some people who don't necessarily understand it, they think, oh, hang on, this is a bit strange. But more or less everyone who actually understands what it is can see that it's kind of common sense to teach human beings how to be more aware of how their attention works.
Yeah, well, we had Dr. Loretta Bruning on one of our podcasts, and she spoke about a period in the brain's development during adolescence where there was a certain period where it's particularly strong at learning new patterns and being very impressionable. And therefore, applying, talking about mindfulness as a life skill as opposed to just getting you out of depression. So, it seems like the school is the perfect environment, especially when the brain, I'm not too sure exactly what that is, but, you guys cover from pause B all the way to dot B, you cover through the primary and the secondary school system, right? But during that period, there is that moment where the brain really, it has an accelerated ability of retaining information and developing.
Yes, that's correct. And the difficulty in a school's context is assuading underfunded head teachers with colossal academic and other pressures on them to give the time that is required for people to learn that skill.
Yeah.
And that's tough. It's tough. It's not just tough for mindfulness people, it's tough for head teachers. They've got a lot on their plates.
Yeah.
And somehow we have to find a way of communicating with them and, working with them to see how mindfulness can be implemented in a way which doesn't either, lead them into financial, more financial pressures or conflict or, challenge where they think they should be putting their curriculum time.
I mean, I know you mentioned muck mindfulness in your Action for Happiness session.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I just wanted to, as a way of sort of cost cutting, do you see a role that technology could play in the spread of mindfulness to sort of, let's say, rather than the teacher run it, that, get students to use apps or something like that they could, you don't need the training involved.
I think I've got a lot of time for good mindfulness apps, and I have got a lot of time for young people and grown-ups using them. I don't think I have no issue with that. I think I do also think though that you can't beat quality face-to-face training, because what you can't do with an app very easily, you can do it to some extent, and there are some really interesting innovations in this space, but it is sort of say, right, well, how did that practice go? What did you notice when we were sitting quietly there for 5 minutes? And the skill of a mindfulness teacher is not just the leading of the practices, partly actually I think because many times silence, I sometimes think there's too much talking in mindfulness practice. There's silence with correct instructions is actually, I think a vastly underrated practice in the secular mindfulness world. Yeah. But even more so, the skill of the teacher is to understand what happened, to ask you what happened during that 5 minutes of silence, and to help you learn from that and understand, how your mind is, what your mind's doing, where your attention's going, how you might come to get a bit more traction on that. Joseph Goldstein, a very famous mindfulness teacher, originally a Buddhist meditation teacher, he says, if you want to understand your mind, sit down and watch it. Now the app might help you to do the sitting down and watching, but you need the teacher. Ideally, it's better to do that without any teacher to some extent. That's a dangerous thing to say. That can also be bad. We can come back to that. But having a teacher there who can help you unpick and understand what you experienced during those minutes of silence is really important, and that's what apps would struggle to do.
Yeah.
In my mind, the idea that I had of what you guys is you reach out to different schools and say, hey, we have this great curriculum, can we come in, sit down with your senior staff, get them on board, and then if they give the thumbs up, then roll it out to the teachers. And only if there's a successful training and implementation with the teachers, then it will then get rolled out, and then the students, and then it gets taught to the students. Is that an accurate perception of what happens?
It's not a totally accurate. The second part, yes. The first part, not quite, because Mindfulness in Schools project can't offer themselves to go into every school and talk with every head teacher. So what we're trying to do is inform around that area to help schools understand what their options are, and to help schools find an appropriate and well-qualified mindfulness coach to come in and train the teachers to begin with. We don't go in and train the teachers. But you're absolutely right, Guy, in that without training the teachers, it's never going to go anywhere. The way you really want to roll mindfulness into a school is to train the teachers, because you wouldn't want to learn to swim from somebody who's never been in the pool. And it's only once you've been in the pool that you understand what it is you're teaching. So you have to really train the teachers also just so they can feel the benefits of it. teachers are generally quite persuasive people. That's why they're teachers. They like teaching. They like communication. They like, teachers are often performers in that sense. And if you can get the teacher to really feel the benefits of mindfulness in their own lives, then they will be 10 times more likely, 100 times more likely to persuade the kids that, to guide the kids in their understanding of mindfulness. The worst thing is when you get teachers that get given a manual and go and teach that, and they don't know what it is, they don't care about it. It's never going to work.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, you really have to understand it internally, don't you?
Yeah.
So it's not something you can just, as you said, put in a manual and say, teach this, because
no.
If you don't have the well, I guess you say that, but what sprung to mind when you were talking about teaching and finding a good teacher is also how this also, being mindful actually gets you more in touch with your intuition. And I like the word intuition because when you break it down, it's inner tuition. So it's like talking to your higher self as opposed to the scatterbrain, maybe not so helpful or productive, or maybe destructive fear, or I guess what you want to call it.
Or the monkey mind.
Or the monkey mind, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What percentage of... I'm just, like I said, I'm trying to go back to the way that I'm kind of envisaging this in my mind, but let's say we approach 10 schools show interest, and then 10 schools get the training. Out of those 10, how many are successful in onboarding and getting their staff trained to the point that they're ready to teach? And then of those, how many then go and teach to the students? And then how many then are able to sustain that for, who knows, the 8-week course plus, or if they do implement it? Yeah.
Guy, sadly, we don't know. We don't have that data. We would love to have that data, but we don't have it. It's such early days. NISP is still a very small organisation. Mm-hmm. We don't have that information. We train the teachers. The teachers go off and teach it in their schools. Yeah. That's one of the next stages of our development, is to help us to understand what is actually happening, post-training. Yeah. We have what we call reconnect days when teachers come back together again. We hear anecdotes, but we honestly, we don't know. Yeah. We just don't know. Yep. My honest sense at the moment is that it's relatively few who really embed it in their school, certainly in secondary schools, which is where I have more experience. Relatively few implement it in a way which is really properly embedded.
Yes.
We're beginning to understand what the difficulties are, and we're also beginning to understand how you might measure that. So there's a very exciting piece of work done by Dr. Stephanie Wild, who is part of the Myriad project in Oxford, and she's been to different schools who are implementing mindfulness, and she's spoken to people who are for it, people who are against it. She's looked at the difficulties and the barriers, and she is coming up with some really interesting findings about how you can tell, how do you know when a school has properly embedded mindfulness? Yeah. I don't want to preempt her findings or sort of steal her thunder on that, but and some of them, I was well aware of. Others have been more of a surprise, but I think that's exciting that at least we might have an indicator of what is what is mindfulness. How do we know when mindfulness is embedded in a school? Yeah. How do you measure that?
Yeah. Well, Anne and I were speaking earlier about the secondary school in Wales.
Yeah, I think it was a college, sixth form college. And I think it was the most successful in the country in terms of their A-level results. Mm-hmm. And apparently it was a mindfulness school. So students, I'm not sure, I can't remember.
They did a minimum of half an hour of meditation each week, the students did. And the best results in the country.
Yeah, do you remember the name?
Not to say there's a direct correlation.
I was going to say
I know you're.
It's not causation thing there. I don't know, Guy. I mean, it looked great. I mean, I think we've got to accept that this is an uncertain field, and we're pioneering its new territory, and it's early days. And to be honest, what generally scares me is when you get people really bigging it up the whole time. I think what is healthy is that we are slightly skeptical, that we are slightly cautious, that we aren't overclaiming, that we are doing what's required to understand where it does work and where it doesn't work. I mean, part of what I've learned in the last few years is to accept that there are young people who it's not for them. But that doesn't mean they can't understand it. For me, that's the key objective in a school's context, is that young people understand what it is and have some sense of why it might be there. Just like you get kids who understand drama but never do it, or understand sport but never do that, or understand, people like me who have great respect for people who can do physics but never could personally get the hang of it. It's a discipline which is respected as a discipline in a school context and in a school culture. And so it is given due respect and weight in the way a school functions. But that doesn't mean you get everybody, you are not going to get everybody practicing for half an hour every day and wanting to practice. Of course, you can force them to do it, and there are examples of where that's happened. But if they're being forced to do it and they don't really want to do it, and actually all they're doing when they're silent is resenting the fact that some teacher's making them be quiet for half an hour in the morning when they're 14 years old and they'd rather be playing Call of Duty, that's a backward step.
Yes.
What you want is for young people to choose to spend even 2 minutes a day just to stop and breathe.
And I think the caution, Claire Kelly said, not letting the enthusiasm run ahead of the evidence, and I think it's right. It gives it more, I think, legitimacy and respect if
definitely
you are cautious in your claims, because that's in the scientific spirit, without, evidence-based research, you're just presenting something that would not have, then we can roll it out, I think, or...
Yeah, especially in when you're talking about schools where they're, it's very, I can imagine, the hundreds of hurdles that need to be crossed to get anything approved and rolled out. But at the same time, Anne and I, we love to have this debate about, I'm more of the panacea side when it comes to my. So Anne's very much on we call it like the Mulder and Scully. When we have
I love it.
When we have this debate, because
but like you, I have to say, I of course you run the .B project and etc. So of course we believe, but I think that the difficulties of trying to, if you like, sell it to management or schools or people, you have to have some sort of substantial evidence, or at least be cautious in what your claims are. Because
absolutely.
I agree.
And I think my greatest fear in education, it will, if it grows too quickly, it won't work. There are not enough high quality adult mindfulness teachers in the country to train the hundreds of thousands of teachers in the UK. There just aren't enough. The pyramid of training is very, very narrow at the top, and mindfulness takes time. You can't learn it in a week and teach it the next week. It takes time, and in my view, it really takes years before you can really almost like you need to go through I think you almost need to go through the honeymoon period of practice, which might be 3, 4, 5 years before you can really keep it in perspective. And because mindfulness is so new as a field, there aren't that many teachers, and that's going to take time.
I read another anecdotal story in an online article about applying mindfulness for kids in detention. And it was the first time I saw mindfulness being applied in schools, but almost, it was really refreshing to see that, because I thought, what better way to spend detention than say, all right, if you're going to misbehave, then you have to do this. And as a result, that school, it went from I don't know how many suspensions to 0 suspensions that year, because of, the repeat offenders would have to go through this course necessarily. And as a result, I guess I don't want to use the recidivism rates for a school in detention, but, the amount of times that they were then re-offenders and had to go back in detention was significantly, stopped altogether.
That's an interesting one, Guy. You mentioned that, because that one, that's a good example of where, because the press really got hold of that one, and that was interesting, because I was actually, that's a very good example of it. Just depends on how you do it. Actually, to be honest, initially that rang a lot of alarm bells for me, that report, because it sounded like mindfulness might be being used as a punishment, and that's not terribly helpful, because then suddenly you associate being bad with practicing mindfulness. If it becomes a punishment, then you're not really framing it in quite the right way. But you see, it just depends how you're doing it, because if there's a teacher who has no relationship with the child and is telling the child off and says, you idiot, you're going to do a detention, I'm going to make you sit quietly for half an hour, that just isn't going to work. You just breed resentment. Whereas if you've got a teacher who says, you know what, I've tried detentions, it doesn't seem to work, why don't you come along and let's just experiment here, let's just sit quietly for half an hour and see what happens. That's what I'm going to ask you to do. Now, if the teacher has a relationship with that child and the child respects the teacher and says, okay, let's have a go at that, great. But if it's a teacher they really don't like, who's forcing them to be quiet for half an hour, I can't see any benefit coming from that. I can actually see a lot of destructive things emerging from that scenario. So again, I don't know the detail on that. On that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, because there are many prisons that have now, introduced mindfulness to those, inmates that want to do that, and that doesn't mean I now associate mindfulness as a punishment for prisoners, because I mean, that for me has been one of my biggest issues with prisons, is that it is a place where people get punished as opposed to a place where they get rehabilitated. And you just look at the rates of reoffending.
Yeah.
And, but those that have done the mindfulness course, again, I don't know how much science is done, but I know I've read over 5 different cases in 5 different prisons, independent research, where, they've taken a group of, fair enough, it's a group that wanted to do it, that have accepted to say, I want to be part of this course. It wasn't rolled out to everyone there. But those that did attend, more than 70% had a, certain positive reaction, and reoffending rates as well. The recidivism rates has been shown to decrease significantly as a result of, a sustained mindfulness practice. And again, like you said, I'm assuming that these are mindfulness instructors that are caring and are nurturing and understand that it's not simply, focus on your breathing. It's a bit more about, all right, well then how was that 10 minutes for you? Let's go into it. Let's explore it a bit. Let's share, let everyone understand how difficult it is together, and, slowly there, because it is very revealing. There are a lot of learning points of just being alone, just understanding how crazy and how many thoughts randomly just pop into your mind. It is very profound, and it can be very liberating and a great way to, especially deal with being in prison.
Yeah, and if you haven't read it already, Guy, do look in the Mindful Nation UK report, because there's a section in there about criminal justice.
Yeah.
Because there are some people doing some really great work in prisons.
Maybe if I can throw in one more question, perhaps.
Yeah,
just some of the difficulties, and I know sort of, but financial constraints in trying to get mindfulness in schools, convincing senior management and time, and what about parents? Supposing there were how do we sort of convince parents that we're not actually? I mean, so basically,
yeah. Generally, to be honest, and most of the time, parents are massively supportive. We don't get that many objections from parents. You do occasionally, but I would say on the whole, parents tend to be, again, this is anecdotal, but in pretty much any kind of school, parents tend to be very much on board and actually kind of want to do it themselves. If anything, what you get is sort of over parent enthusiasm. You get a lot of parents coming up to you saying, can you teach me this mindfulness stuff so I can teach my kid? And the answer there is almost certainly no, because any adolescent that's tried to teach anything by their parent, any self-respecting adolescent will probably immediately reject it, because that's what they do in adolescence. You're programmed to reject what your parents tell you. You're forging your own identity. You're separating. It doesn't mean, it's a confusing time. But I think with younger children, that probably does work very well, and has worked very well. I had that experience with my own children. But yeah, parents generally are on side. There's a particularly interesting area with parents in the clinical world, where mindfulness is being used in mental health services by very experienced psychotherapists and clinical psychologists and psychiatrists with very extreme cases of mental health, anxiety-related disorders. And that's actually where parents, it's really exciting because there's some work going on, South London and Maudsley, Exeter, where kids are taught in one room their mindfulness, and then at the same time, the parents go off and are taught in a different room. And actually, quite what's working here we're looking into, but what's quite exciting is actually imagine if you're a parent whose child is experiencing a really difficult mental health crisis, actually just for you to be in a room with other parents who are in the same space and confronting the same difficulties and sharing time with those, some of it silently, some of it talking, that actually is bringing, it seems, certainly anecdotally, tremendous benefits to them. Same with, there's a very moving research on cancer sufferers and mindfulness practice. It is not being put forward as a cure for cancer, but in terms of the way it helps those suffering from particularly terminal illness to come to terms with that illness and to be with others who are in that awful situation is very moving. And you can just see why mindfulness can help there, because there is so much fear about what will happen, and there is so much regret and fear and guilt and all sorts of complex emotions about what has happened. So just to be able to be present and feel one's breathing and be alive in the present moment, which is so hard to be when you're confronted with a difficulty like that, is very, very moving. Very, very powerful stuff.
Okay, brilliant. So, Guy,
So on that note, Richard, what for you are the most important aspects for a happy life, and what really matters most for you for a happy life?
I'm coming across as such a cynic in this interview, Guy. I don't mean to be, because you see, I struggle slightly with the word happy. I suppose I prefer the word content.
So
I know Action for Happiness very clear on this, actually, and I have tremendous respect, I should say, for Mark Williamson, who's done this, and certainly Anthony Selden, who was pioneering this at the beginning. And I think they're also aware of this, the difficulty of the word happiness. So I would prefer to call it content rather than happy.
Which in French means happy, but go on.
Can I jump in there?
The way we translate it.
Content français means happy,
but I think the question was what matters most in life. In fact, I think you threw in the happiness there.
Yeah, maybe I freestyled the happiness.
So the question is actually what matters most in life.
I suppose it's that thing about be true to yourself and be true to your values and to this is again a slightly cheesy thing to say, but to go with your heart, because I think that is where you find that one finds the greatest fulfillment, is to follow your heart. And I hope that most of our hearts as humans are touched by kindness, by love, by what is good. And I think we all have a sense of what that is, and it's really a question of finding ways of uncovering that innate human capacity for love and for kindness, which matters most to me, and which is very, very difficult, but which is always an ongoing process.
Yeah. All right. Well, if our listeners want to show support or find out more, what is the best way to do that?
I think probably to go to our website, which we're kind of redeveloping. It's grown, and it's not. I don't think at the moment it's not as clear in certain areas as we're going to make it. But I hope that if you just Google .b, just those two characters .b. Certainly in the UK, you'll see all of our stuff. And I hope that will, if you sort of spend a bit of time navigating around that,
Yeah.
I hope you would understand, a little bit more about what we do, and there's, lots of ways that you could help.
Yeah.
But if you read that, I hope that will be a way in.
Sure.
And I would obviously be very grateful to any listeners, viewers out there who did want to get involved, because there can never be enough support for this kind of work.
All right. Well, again, when I mention you guys to the rest of the team here, I put it under the label, being part of the change you want to see in the world. So, we love the work that you're doing, and it's so refreshing. And when you read so many negative stories in the press and what's going on, not so many people know that there's a whole movement of people doing amazing things, of which .B and Mindfulness in Schools project is doing. So
Great, thank you
very much for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne and Fran, as well.